next introduction that I make makes me feel a little intimidated. And there are some people in the industry who needs no introduction. Everybody knows him. There are some companies who are also equally well placed that they don't need introduction. But if I have to really talk about the next gentleman who will join us and talk about the industry, that person is from aviation industry. And the person understands the aviation industry like a back of his palm. He's a specialist in travel and GDS systems. He's held top positions in renowned airlines like Jet Air, Scandinavian Airways, British Airways. His core expertise lies in strategy management, managing people amazingly well, and making sure that we assure one thing which is most important in business, and that's revenue. Apart from profession, he loves adventurous road trips on one side and has a finesse of playing golf, listening to music, and passion for reading. So I think it's a beautiful combination. By now, I think you know whom I'm talking about. I'm talking about the most eminent personality in the industry, President and CEO of Interglobe Technology Quotient, the distributors, the official distributors of Travelport, WorldSpan, and Galileo in India and Sri Lanka. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for our friend, Mr. J.B. Singh.
That's a bit way over the top, I think, but thank you anyway. Very well done, Team Ayanaant. And you know, one of the things I wanted to comment before I jump onto my talk was one of the differences that I noticed in this symposium for the day was the involvement of people from the education sector. I have not seen that before, and I think that's well spotted, and it's great to have them here. Because one of the biggest challenges, and I'm not going to really talk about it today, but I thought I must mention it, that the industry will face will be around skilled manpower. The industry today already employs close to about 7% of the employment base of the country, 38 million people. When I say, and I'm referring to the whole travel and tourism, not just aviation. And in the next 10 years, it's going to employ almost about 48 million people. There's a huge lack of skilled resources, leadership capabilities, and variety of other things, a variety of emerging models. And we need to work very closely with the education sector, set up in the country. So well done on that. I think that might lead on at next, when you do these sessions again, is to probably have panels that talk around HR and leadership development and so on. My brief today was really to touch around some areas around the travel industry, but largely focused around aviation. What's been the journey so far? Where are we currently? How does it look? How do the LCCs look? How do full service carriers look? What's been happening around in the world? And then to talk a little bit about trends in the industry. There are several mega trends that are happening, and there are 30, 40, 50 mega trends. Maybe there are so many mega trends that are happening that we are not ourselves aware of. For the purposes of this talk today, I selected about 6 or 7, which I thought might be relevant. And Vishal has been saying he keeps coming back to the industry, and he says that we are all very good people. I don't know about that, but he probably keeps coming back because we're such a chaotic industry, and everything just keeps changing all the time, and we can never get out of it. Which is why I've called my presentation "Navigating in a Chaotic World." It's a mega industry. It is just so big as far as aviation is concerned that quite often we take it for granted and we do not understand what all goes behind. Now we understand, but we can't always figure out for ourselves and conjure up images of what's really happening in this industry. Globally, the industry moves over 3 million people. That was last year's numbers. 51 million tons of cargo. It contributes significantly to the whole global GDP. The industry continues to grow, resilient over all kinds of pressures that it faces. It's possibly one of the most capital-intensive, resource-intensive, and most prone to risk in the world than most industries that you will ever see. This is one of those industries where most airlines, operators struggle to make bottom lines over decades and decades. And if we look at how the industry has moved over the last so many years, it has continued to register positive growth in terms of volume. And if you look at the slides, and we are talking about something that starts out from 1971 and maps out a 15-year period, it has registered a robust growth of 4.5% and will continue to deliver that kind of growth going forward. What will, of course, happen is a lot of the growths and how they're going to get mapped out are going to continue to shift across the globe, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in the next few slides. Coming down to India, and I'm going to take a couple of minutes here. The slide looks daunting, but actually it's very easy to navigate. Just to give you a flavor on how India is looking. So India today is 12th in size in terms of the whole travel and tourism industry. This is now not just aviation. It is forecasted to be number 28. 188 countries were taken as a part of this study, and it is forecasted to be number 28th in the rate of growth for the current year that we are undergoing. That's 2013 calendar year. But going forward, it is number 3 in terms of long-term growth. So if you were to see how the variety of industry, travel and tourism industries are going to grow in the world, between now and 2023, we are number 3. So which means we do have some immediate issues that we need to deal with, which is whether it's crunch of capacity, lack of infrastructure, and variety of things that I don't want to get into. There is still a huge amount of promise that holds for the industry over the next 10 years in terms of the rate of growth that the industry will register. If you see the circles on the side, those circles really talk about the employment piece, which I briefly mentioned. The industry today employs 38 odd million people, going on to about 48 million people by 2013. And as far as the GDP is concerned, India is already contributing, the industry today contributes to 6% of the GDP. Now that's pretty high, and it continues to grow. Because don't forget, we are a large country, and therefore our GDP value is significant. And we are, by the way, the 4th largest in terms of GDP. So therefore, the industry today is anyway contributing close to about 6%. Globally, the tourism industry contributes about 9%. So we are kind of getting there. And what is also important for us, and that's not on this slide, is to understand the rate of investments that are coming into the industry. So the investments over now and for the next 10 years will continue to grow at the rate of 6.5%. And by the time we get down to 2023, we'll have 3,500 billion rupees that is going to get invested in this industry over and above on what is happening today in terms of investment. The investments will come in a variety of sectors in the industry, I guess, and hopefully everything I heard about the cruises this morning, I do hope will probably get covered in that scope. Quick slide just to set the stage for you. 4th largest economy, continue to grow at the rate of, whatever, 5 to 6% in this year. But the real middle class is where everybody's interest has been. It's nothing new. People have been interested in this growing middle class for now a couple of decades. I remember when I joined the industry, everyone had spoke about middle class at that time, and we're still waiting for that to grow. I guess it's already started. This is a slide that really talks about urban population. Now that's growing robustly, but having said that, the middle class from today to 2030, according to the latest McKinsey report, will constitute 50% of our total population. So if our total population is whatever, 1.23 billion or thereabouts, 50% of that will constitute the middle class. It's obviously going to come from tier 2, tier 3 markets and so on, but we'll speak a bit more in detail about that later. A lot of stuff around the online piece, and yes, they've been growing rapidly, and they obviously have caught the right space. A lot of my other slides will resonate with what Vinay and some of the others were talking about during the talk. But yeah, that's how. And one of the key enablers, not just for the online space, but for the industry at large, is the whole area around active internet users. So if you really see in the next 5 years, we will add over 200 million internet users in the country. aviation is hugely underpenetrated in India, and whatever we see about aviation in India, it's absolutely nothing. We haven't yet started. So if we were to just compare the capacity that we deploy in India per population, we can see that we are really way off the mark. So we've got an aircraft, which sits at about 2.8 million people on an average, 2.8 million people per aircraft. We've got not even 400 civil aircrafts flying around. China has 1,400. The US goes into a couple of thousand, 7,000, 8,000. So we are way behind. But having said that, that in itself poses an opportunity as liberalization will come in. That's the other thing that happens with the industry. So if you look at India, we're sitting kind of right there at the bottom of the pile. But this is the growth curve that variety of studies have been done to show how travel picks up as per capita picks up. Now, India obviously is sitting in the sub 2,000 in terms of per capita. Obviously, we've got a huge rural and impoverished population across the country. But as that grows up, and those big growths are going to come out of the rural, out of the tier 2, tier 3, and possibly tier 4 markets, we've got a very long way to go. And if you look at this curve, it starts to kind of flatten out when per capita kind of reaches up to about $17,000 or $18,000. But we have a very long way to go. So that's a big journey. Interesting to see that China is significantly ahead of us. They're registering better aircraft penetration, they're registering better per capita, and therefore they're in a much higher growth phase in terms of this activity, travel and tourism activity. But there are some differences between China and us, which I'll talk about briefly later. And that's how the whole thing about the need to travel by air, those wonderful slides before, absolutely, and that's going to continue. But emerging markets will bring in the greater growth, but the greater growth will sit over a much wider population base, which is closer to about 6 billion people. And that market is going to grow in excess of 6%. Some markets will be lower, some markets will be higher. It will all depend on policies and bilaterals between countries and the funding that will happen in aircraft deployment and so on. So if you look at some markets like Indonesia and so on, they're growing at an absolutely scorching pace. India, of course, had slowed down last year, sadly, with the demise of Kingfisher. But most of the European markets and the more mature markets will only grow at about 4%. But what is important to note here is domestic China and domestic India will drive this growth. And that's important for us to understand, and which will bring India to be the 5th largest traffic flow by 2031 in domestic. I don't know if how many of you know, but we are already the 9th largest aviation market in the world, and by 2020 we are expected to become the 3rd largest. Outbound growing, I think that's something that all of you in the outbound side are completely familiar with. Obviously, you can see most of the areas are in surrounding and regional markets. This trend will continue to grow. I did notice there was a small debate about senior travel earlier down in the cruise side of the business, but that's a big emerging segment in India. In the next 10 years, over the market size of senior travel is also going to grow to about 7 million. So that's another big area. Well, that's where we are currently, completely as an industry. After I finish this, I will quickly move on to some trends, but this will form a reasonable background on where we are. Big losses. So the industry is obviously, from the aviation side, is not doing very well. There have been big challenges around infrastructure. There have been big challenges around the dollar recently in the last couple of months. The dollar affects everything. The dollar affects price of fuel, interest payments, payment to lessors, maintenance, and variety of things that airlines need to keep their planes flying. And that's not been very good. It doesn't seem to be improving, but that's how it is. Fuel, thankfully, has held on. So the fuel really went through the roof about 8 or 9 months ago, touched about 115 to a barrel, went down, it's hovering about 100, 102. But then, the whole dollar piece has thrown things out of gear completely. But a lot of good things have happened. So the government has committed significant amount of investments in airport infrastructure. I think we will continue to see that pace. The airlines themselves are putting a lot of pressure on the government, so we will see a lot of new airports coming up. We will see airports coming up in smaller markets. The low-cost carriers will fuel that growth. They will connect city pairs that have normally not been what I would say a normal city pair. And we will see a lot of that. We're already seeing some of it. So these kind of things will allow and force, tier 2, tier 3 markets to leapfrog as well. The whole story around the new bilaterals and some spin-offs that happened because of the recent FDI is very, very good news. So there have been enhancement of seat capacity between the UAE and ourselves, 55,000 seats or so, which will kind of get infused in the system over 3 years. So we will see a lot of that happening with a lot of other markets. So we'll see a lot of that happening with a lot of other Middle Eastern markets and Far Eastern markets and so on. But liberalization is critical, and I think the government will have to slowly continue to keep responding to it, and the pressure has to be built by the industry. You guys know the travelers, better informed and so on, so I won't delve too much on that. But yes, the traveler has completely changed, and we will discuss a little bit about their behaviors later. Trends. Now, before I jump into trends, I always approach trends with caution, because quite often when we look at trends, we don't agree with them. And even if we look at trends, we don't even recognize them till they stand in our face. I mean, even today, people ask questions whether online travel agents will survive, or whether LCCs will survive, or so on and so on. I always believe that trends should be taken on in their entirety. Trends must be debated. Trends must be taken to the last mile, and we have to learn to adopt and change with trends as much as we can and find our own space. The travel industry is extremely chaotic and starts to confuse people. And we have to find a way in that confusion. Because if we see how the next 10, 15, 20 years are going to pan out, they're going to be extremely unstable. But in that instability, I believe there will be stability. We have to find that. So that brings me, just as a reality check, on where some of these trends started. I started my career in 1985, and I never realized at that time that Ryanair had started. I'd never even heard of it. I heard of it much later. But somebody in 1985 understood a trend that was emerging about shifting the order of operating the airline business. Ryanair was found. This happened in July of 1985. In October of 1985, Emirates started. The shifting of economies had already started. And Emirates saw that. A lot of other countries in the Middle East, other parts of that kind of geography could have seen that opportunity. Did not see it that early. Even when Emirates started in 1985, nobody really gave it much thought. Okay, so, it's a company out of the UAE, they'll probably get free fuel, they'll fly people for free, and so on and so forth. Look where they have reached today. What happened in 1985, 25, 27 years later, has completely changed the world order of how aviation is run. It has shifted hubs out from the western part of the world into this part of the world. And that's how it's all starting to shape up. If you start to see what the LCC is going to do, the LCC is actually continuing to grow dramatically. And if we see how the traffic forecasts are looking for 2031, LCCs will grow from the 15% to almost about 20%. The big mega carriers will continue to remain at about 59%. We will see shrinkages that will happen in the major network carriers. So the LCCs will continue to dominate, and 5% growth, by the way, in the aviation market is humongous. There will be close to about 10,000 aircrafts that will get purchased over time, out of which almost about 65% of that fleet deployment will go towards growth. And that's how traffic density has been shifting. The first trends, if we start to map from 1971, the density and the center of gravity of traffic moves from the North Atlantic and starts to continuously shift towards the east. This shift will continue, and here it's coming, if you're just pure calculation of RPKs is going to sit somewhere over northern Africa, and this entire pull is obviously going to happen with all the fleet deployment and the travel that's going to happen in the Far East and in our part of the world. That's how the top airports are going to look. Dubai is going to be the second largest airport by 2031. 8 of the top 20 airports are going to sit out of Asia Pac. Sadly, it's unfortunate we don't have anything in India, but that's fine, because it is unlikely that India has the propensity to create a network carrier, because we don't have to create a network carrier, you need some basic ingredients. A large geography and multiple hubs do not work well for creating network carriers. You should have very strong home carrier to create network carriers. You should be geographically well placed to create a network carrier. We don't have those ingredients, and therefore it's doubtful that we will get to that spot. Well, what's really going to drive tourism, and what really does drive tourism? There are two hot spots on this. One is the one that sits over France, and one that sits over India. Regional tourism is key to driving tourism. We have to build upon regional tourism, and India will have to continue to build on regional tourism. If we see the entire growth that happened in Europe and how travel happens in Europe, it's all largely driven by regional tourism. If 80 million people visit France and 7 million climb the Eiffel Tower, they're coming from Spain, they're coming from, wherever, Italy and Germany and Belgium or whatever it is. And that's how tourism moves. Long-haul tourism will never bring the huge volumes. It does, but it will never bring the big volumes that regional tourism drives. If you look how China is benefiting today, they're driving regional tourism through Southeast Asia. Of course, they have a huge amount of long-haul travel which comes from other parts of the world. And similarly, Thailand has benefited from regional tourism. Now, we have a bit of a difference, which is what I was saying, than China. We kind of have challenges in the neighborhood. We do not have access of driving regional tourism through rail, through road, and completely dependent to bring those kind of volumes from, by air. I think we will see, and then of course our product is where it is, but I won't get into that. But I think what we are going to certainly see now in the area is we are going to see a lot of emergence of new destinations. Myanmar is already up and running. It's going to grow dramatically. You've got Indonesia, Vietnam. Already people are talking about Mongolia. The CIS bloc is going to start to do extremely well. So there's a lot that's going to happen for the outbound world to start looking at, possibly already start creating synergies, because these markets will open up. The bilaterals will be very liberal in these areas, and we will see a fair amount of traffic growths that will happen within a 3, 4, 5 hour flying time from our country. Other trends in technology, I think we heard a lot about it from our friends from the online side. But I think what I would like to touch upon, one of the big shifts that will happen is when the new engines and the 737 MAX aircrafts come in. They will bring in significant fuel savings in the industry, and that will actually start to change the aviation industry to look at their business quite differently. Very, very big trend on smart airports. Very big trend on smart hotels. Like Vinay said, the consumer today is driving that change. Then there's the whole leapfrog effect. Throughout Asia, it's been leapfrogging. India continues to leapfrog. We saw that in the telecom industry. We are seeing that now in the aviation industry. Leapfrogging, of course, brings in much more, slightly different challenges. But we will see a lot of leapfrogging happening even in your industry. So if bilaterals start to come and bilaterals start to open up, and you will suddenly find that your tourism numbers can go way out of whack because Mongolia is open, Indonesia is open, direct flights to Vietnam, and so on and so forth. But what is also helps in leapfrogging, or actually drives leapfrogging, is investor attractiveness. So the industry 10, 15 years ago never had that kind of investor attractiveness. And we see that today. And we've seen that on the online space. We've seen that with some of the brick and mortar companies like Cox & Kings did a very good IPO. And there's a huge amount of investor attractiveness. Investor attractiveness brings money, funding, brings in structure, discipline on how we manage our business. So that's another thing that's happening, and that's going to push the industry forward. The other very big trend, and I think it's a very, very important trend, is the barbell effect. And what really is the barbell effect is when the industry starts to divide and the middle section of the industry, I won't say falls off, but starts to become not the real area where the game happens. And the barbell effect is really about all the business happening either in the high, heavy, deluxe kind of an environment, or the low, not the low, but I would say the economy side of the environment. That shifting happens in most emerging markets. We are seeing that. We're seeing those trends in the way bookings shape up out of India. And therefore, I think possibly the only advice I can give in this short time is that all of us should find our niches and our spaces of where we wish to operate. I think somebody alluded to that in the online side as well. What is it that we want to do? We need to become specialists in that particular field and have an absolutely completely definitive approach of what it is. If it is pilgrimage, then it's pilgrimage. Or if it is adventure, it's adventure, and so on. And there's the other piece that will handle the growth, which they'll bring through partnerships and so on. Big trend towards transparency. The industry and the government will start to get more transparent. They will get driven by that. If the industry and the government is not transparent, we will never get sustainable frameworks out, which will just not allow us to do business. But having said that, the industry has to equally become transparent with the consumer. He demands it today. People already said today, we are getting pushed by what the consumer wants, and that's very true. Peer-induced travel is big, something like TripAdvisor, and so on. More and more people are listening to their friends and so on, and this is an area which, with social media, I think is very, very relevant, and I think this is going to continue to grow and gather more space. I don't think we've still seen the real power of social media and peer-induced travel. Of course, Tier 2, Tier 3, all of you are familiar with that. We must look at these. These are the big, big growth areas. They are hungry for knowledge. They are hungry for products. And the growths that are coming out of here are enormous. There's a small clipping there, which is put there, which is on the extreme, I think, on the right-hand side. 50% of Jabong sales and 55% of Myntra sales is coming out of these markets. That's a big number. We should have asked these questions from the online guys, how they feel about these markets. Finally, and after this I have a short video which I think you'll find interesting, but it is a chaotic world, and but we have to find stability in the world. There's a whole story about generation flux. There's a lot happening. There are lots of trends, and we shouldn't confuse ourselves with those trends. We should just isolate those trends. We should get into healthy debates, find our spaces in those trends, because the industry doesn't drive those trends. Everything is driven from the outside. If the airline fares go up, the industry is not driving them. It's the pure demand and supply. There's no point even debating it. It's going to happen. If the hotel rates are going to drop, it's pure demand and supply. This is sheer play of economics. What we should wish for is a free, liberal, and an open environment to compete, and let the consumer decide what works. So over to this video. It's about a 5-minute video, but I think you'll like it. How does it? No sound.
Cash, can we have the sound?
Well, with that thought, I thank you for your time and patience.
Thank you very, very much, JB. That wouldn't have, you know, very rightly Vikas did say that if you wouldn't have come today and shared your perspective of the aviation industry, this meet would have been incomplete in a sense. So thank you very much for sharing what you did today. And on that note, maybe just extend something to you. Thank you very much.